of the Boston Global Forum and at the faculty at the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you all for joining us. I particularly want to thank Tuan Nguyen, who's Boston Global Forum CEO, Editor-in-Chief. Like everything, he put this conference together. So he is, in the minds of those in Boston Global Forum, the Boston Global Forum. This is part of our continuing effort to draw attention to cybersecurity. In an earlier conference, we announced the Code of Conduct for Cyber Peace and Security. Earlier, we also announced the establishment of Cybersecurity Day, which is the day we observe today, and we hope that other organizations will take our lead and help us to grow it. And later this morning, Anders Core of Core Analytics will summarize our recently prepared cybersecurity report. Before introducing you to Michael Dukakis, who will moderate today's conference, I want to read to you a message we received yesterday from Ban Ki-moon, the UN General Secretary. It is a pleasure to greet the Boston Global Forum. Thank you, Governor Dukakis, for convening this gathering and for guiding its initiatives. I welcome your focus on cybersecurity. Advances in technology and science have opened up wonderful new opportunities, but they have also exposed us to new risks. As our lives have moved increasingly online, so too must our values and principles. Cybersecurity has become a major global challenge with wide-ranging implications for peace, security, trade, and sustainable development. The United Nations has recognized the need to confront the threats that arise from the use of ICTs and the Internet for purposes that are inconsistent with the objectives of the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Member states have been working to develop a global culture of cybersecurity that can fight cyber terrorism and cybercrime while protecting freedom and sharing the benefits of ICTs and the Internet. Cybersecurity will also be crucial as we implement the recently adopted 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which will require us to tap into the potential of the data revolution and close today's still large digital divides. On 15-16 December, the United Nations General Assembly will convene a high-level meeting to review progress in the implementation of the outcome of the World Summit on the Information Society. Your discussion at this year's Global Forum can provide a timely contribution as we strive together to meet these challenges. Thank you for your support, and please accept my best wishes for a productive forum. I'd like to introduce you to Michael Dukakis, who's the co-founder and chair of Boston Global Forum, three-term governor of Massachusetts, 1988 Democratic presidential nominee, distinguished professor of political science at Northeastern. I could go on and on. Mike.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Good to have so many of you here with us in Cambridge, and I hope hundreds of you all over the globe who are going to be participating in this conference. And special pleasure, thanks to the Internet, to be able to connect with so many people around the globe. And as all of you know, the Boston Global Forum has been focused on this particular issue now for the past several months. We expect to do so at least for the next year. So we invite the participation and involvement of lots and lots of people, and are especially pleased to have that statement from the Secretary General. Cybersecurity is obviously a leading issue of our time. We just had some major developments in Paris, San Bernardino, which remind us of that. And we also ought to bear in mind, it seems to me, that nobody these days is blameless. The United States and Israel were involved in that Stuxnet caper, which we're all familiar with. My country, I'm sorry to say, hacked the Chancellor of Germany and the President of Mexico, and I'm sure other countries are doing exactly the same thing all over the world. And that's one of the reasons why I think the Secretary General's statement and the work that the UN is doing is so important. The Internet, as we all know, is a source of great benefits, but it's also a source of mayhem and mischief. Cyber-based threats, ranging from online fraud to the stealing of state and business secrets, are on the rise. And for that reason, we need to make cybersecurity an imperative as individuals, as organizations, as governments, as the international community. And to this end, the Boston Global Forum has developed the Ethics Code of Conduct for Cyber Peace and Security. It tries to prescribe how netizens, IT experts, institutions, governments, and others should act. And in an effort to advance the cause of cybersecurity, the Boston Global Forum has initiated Global Cybersecurity Day, and this conference marks that day. We hope others will adopt that idea, building on it in the way that nearly 50 years ago, millions of people came out of their homes and communities to celebrate Earth Day, as it was originally conceived and promoted. In our conference today, we have a number of activities aimed at highlighting cybersecurity. We have initiated an online festival open to people around the world, an opportunity for them to share the benefits of the internet. And we will honor today leaders in cybersecurity, as well as leaders who have contributed to peace, security, and development around the world. Now, I'm going to be taking my cues from Tuan Nguyen, who, as Tom so rightly pointed out, is the man who conceived all of this. And Tuan, I think I'm now supposed to introduce Tom back again. So, are you coming? Tom Patterson or Tom Fiedler? Tom Fiedler. This young man who's approaching the podium, he's a guy I've known for a long time. Born on Cape Cod in Falmouth, Massachusetts, and one of the best reporters and political editors in the country who, for better or for worse, covered me among other people in the 1988 presidential campaign. And now a dean at Boston University. He's back home, so great to have you here.
Thank you.
And welcome.
Thank you, Governor.
Welcome.
Thanks very much.
Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, I bring you greetings from across the river, from Boston University. I believe I have the pleasure of introducing, among many honorees that will be noted today, the award for Business Leader in Cybersecurity. So let me read the language. On behalf of the Boston Global Forum, we would like to recognize two outstanding individuals who have dedicated their careers to the betterment of technology, security, privacy, and the internet within the cybersecurity community at large. Both Mr. Bruce Schneier and Mikko Hyponen have clearly demonstrated their knowledge, skills, and abilities in cybersecurity, both in practice and in educating others. These gentlemen also share many of the same values instilled within the Boston Global Forum and the Ethics Code of Conduct for Peace and Security. They are recognized here today as leaders in cybersecurity and ambassadors for peace, security, and the greater good of the internet and its future. Congratulations to them both. And let me read this. Is Bruce here? No. He will. Ah, okay. Oh, excellent, excellent. Here is, well, let me read the award. It says, for business leaders in cybersecurity, the Boston Global Forum is honored to present this award to Bruce Schneier for his great contribution to educating the public about cybersecurity. And many of you know him here as a fellow at the Berkman Center and from his many prolific books and blogs. And welcome.
Thank you. I assume you can hear me. Thank you very much. I've been thinking about the forum, security, and business, and how they come together. And I think the important thing we have to think about is the speed of innovation. You know, what the internet gives us is an enormous speed of innovation. And I think that's the reason why we put so much of our future in corporate hands. And if you look at government innovation versus commercial innovation is faster. It's going to do things better, quicker, is going to innovate, is going to iterate. And you know, that's for a couple of reasons. You know, we live in a society that is based on rights and not permissions. That you can do something if you think of it and not have to wait for permission. And that really lets us innovate much faster. Now the thing is security is that the attackers are innovating too, just as fast. And by attackers, I mean something very general. Hackers, criminals, corporations, governments, our own, others. And we're seeing all through our technical society, attacks innovate faster than defenses. Right? I mean, some of it's easy. I mean, some of it's easy to understand. There's a basic first mover advantage for an attacker. Some of it is because they are quicker to make use of innovations. Right? They don't have a procurement process. They don't have any rules they have to follow. And because of this, there's a delay. And you can see it again and again. A delay between when a new attack appears and when defenses appear. You can see that in things like credit card fraud. You can see it in identity theft. You can see it in how organizations are using the internet to organize for criminal activity. Right? Again and again, we are playing catch up. And that means we have a security gap. We have a gap between when attackers invent something new and when defenders figure out how to defend against it. And as technology moves faster, we're going to see a wider gap, a bigger gap that can be taken advantage of. Right? Mr. Dukakis mentioned Stuxnet. That was a cyber weapon created by US and Israel, fired against Iran, because attack is easier than defense. And similarly, we have seen China fire cyber weapons at the United States, the OPM data breach. We've seen companies come up with business models that basically surveil us and provide a product or service or make a profit based on that. And again, we are seeing the offensive uses of data outstrip the defenses. And that means that we, as defenders, as society, need to start thinking ahead, thinking more holistically, thinking with more agility, really with more resilience. Now, I have a company up in Alewife, in 3 subway stops north on the Red Line, called Resilient Systems. And we are right now building incident response coordination capabilities. The idea being that when you're being attacked, you need to be fast and effective in response. That's a microcosm. We need to do that at every level. We need to do that at the policy level, internationally, and personally. We need to get better at security, not just in reaction to what the attackers do, but to think ahead in what could happen and to be able to quickly adapt to what does happen. So when you think about cybersecurity and the future and codes of conduct, don't think about today. Think about the future. Today's top secret NSA programs, tomorrow's PhD theses, and the next day's hacker tools. And that will happen again and again and again. And data and technology and computers and networks are becoming so fundamental that we will not be able to make society work unless we can get ahead of this. Thank you. Thank you very much for the award. And I wish I was there, but I'm not. And thank you for letting me attend remotely. Thank you.
Our next award will go to the practitioner in cybersecurity for 2015, and Bob, come on up here. Professor Robert Desimone from MIT, who's professor and director of the McGovern Institute, founded and financed, I might say, by an old friend of mine, who's no longer with us. Anyway, great to have you. Good to see you.
I think you're on. So greetings from the McGovern Institute at MIT. It is my honor to present this year's Practitioner in Cybersecurity Award to Maiko Hipponen. Is he online now? No. So, for his great work and active contribution to the public's knowledge of cybersecurity. I think.
Now, we have 3 awards we want to give to world leaders, and let me address each of them first. The first is to the Prime Minister of Japan, who's been a leader internationally in the effort to do something about cybersecurity. Ironically, his political office was hacked 2 days ago in Tokyo. So this is not an imaginary problem for world leaders. And this award is given to individuals who contribute significantly to the advancement of cybersecurity. Prime Minister Abe has worked tirelessly to make cybersecurity a priority in Japan. Japan's private sector, particularly, has been lagging in its cybersecurity efforts, and recognizing that problem and looking ahead to next year's G7 summit, which will be held in Japan, and then, of course, the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, Prime Minister Abe has made cybersecurity a top policy priority. Under his leadership, Japan recently held the Cyber 3 conference in partnership with the World Economic Forum. The Prime Minister has initiated and led the activity of a newly created cabinet-level office to oversee national policy and promote international cooperation in accordance with the Cybersecurity Basic Act enacted a year ago. And this year, he announced Japan's cybersecurity strategy, a far-reaching plan to strengthen public-private efforts in the cybersecurity area. In that strategy, Japan announced an ambitious diplomatic initiative focusing on international rules and intergovernmental capacity building. He has also exerted regional leadership in this area, engaging in capacity building through cooperation between Japan and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. These and other efforts have put Prime Minister Abe in the forefront among world leaders in advancing the cause of cybersecurity, and the Boston Global Forum is honored to present him the World Leader in Cybersecurity Award. Little picture, photo opportunity. Now, we're going to hear from the Prime Minister? Great.
Abe, Honor Abe.
ご来場の皆様、こんにちは。内閣総理大臣の安倍晋三です。ボストングローバルフォーラムが本年設立3周年を迎えられ、本日このカンファレンスが盛大に開催されましたことに心から喜びを申し上げます。この度はワールドリーダー in Cyber Security アワードをいただきありがとうございます。大変光栄に感じております。今やあらゆるものがインターネットに接続され、情報通信技術がサービスに結びつき、浸透していく時代が到来しています。サイバー空間における安全の確保、サイバーセキュリティは IT の利活用を進め、成長戦略を実践するために必要不可欠な基盤です。と同時に、国家の安全保障、危機管理にとっても極めて重大な課題です。我が国は2016年に伊勢志摩サミット、2020年には東京オリンピック・パラリンピックを控えております。これらを確実に成功に導くためにも、サイバーセキュリティに安全を期する必要があります。このため、政府としては、昨年11月にサイバーセキュリティ基本法を制定し、今年9月に新たなサイバーセキュリティ戦略を各自で決定するなど、国としてサイバーセキュリティの強化に全力を挙げて取り組んでいるところです。サイバー攻撃は年々増加し、国家の関与が疑われるような組織的で高度な攻撃手法なども登場しており、今後、国際社会への脅威がさらに深刻化することが予想されます。我が国は今後とも米国をはじめとする国際社会のパートナーと緊密に連携し、国の重要な情報や財産をしっかりと守り、国際社会の平和と安定の実現のために主導的な役割を果たしてまいります。ボストングローバルフォーラムの皆様におかれては、世界各国でサイバーセキュリティに関する啓発活動を推進し、議論を 盛り上げていただいており、大変心強く思います。本日、サイバーセキュリティデーに行われる世界を代表する皆様方の技能を契機として、安全なサイバー空間の構築に向けた取り組みが一層進展することを心より記念し、ご挨拶といたします。
And representing the Japanese government here at our meeting and conference today is a good friend, the Consul General of Japan here in Boston. Tommy, come up and say a few words.
If I may, yes, I apologize. Well, Governor, Michael, thank you very much. And Boston Global Forum, thank you very much for this. Well, Governor, Michael, and Boston Global Forum, thank you very much. On behalf of Prime Minister of Japan and the Japanese government, it is a great privilege for me to be physically here, and I will make certain that this award will be physically presented to Prime Minister. I'm sure with all of your help, soon we will be able to deliver this through the cyberspace. But in the meantime, I have to use a more traditional means. But I just like to say how pleased we are, because we are trying to make as much progress as possible, and this is a very good encouragement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our next award goes to this year's World Leader in Peace, Security, and Development, and that is Chancellor Angela Merkel. The award is given to individuals who display exemplary leadership in promoting peace, security, and development. And the Chancellor has worked tirelessly toward these goals, not only in Germany, but in the EU and adjoining regions. She's now in her 10th year as Chancellor, and she has a legacy that few post-war European leaders can match. She has led Germany through its economic recovery, while also holding together the Eurozone as it faced the danger of default by a member nation. It's fairly close to me, I might add. She has led the European response to the crisis in Ukraine, promoting tough sanctions while speaking out against those that would escalate the military conflict. Most recently, she has led the European response to the refugee crisis with extraordinary political courage, I might say, and has done so by example, opening Germany's borders and doors to nearly 1 million asylum seekers. That's not only difficult to do as a matter of execution, it's a very difficult thing to do politically. And for that alone, she deserves enormous praise. In words addressed to the German people but intended for all of Europe, she said, "In many regions, war and terror prevail. States disintegrate. For many years we have read about this, we have heard about it, we have seen it on TV. But we have not yet sufficiently understood that what happens in Aleppo and Mosul can affect Essen or Stuttgart. We have to face that now." Such efforts have put Chancellor Merkel in the forefront among world leaders in advancing the cause of peace, security, and development, which is obviously what the Boston Global Forum is striving to do. And so we are honored to present her with this award. Thank you. And the plaque reads, "For her exemplary leadership and contribution to peace, security, and development in Germany, the EU, and adjoining areas." And I might add throughout the world. Congratulations, Chief. Finally, I'm pleased to announce our other recipient of this year's World Leader in Peace, Security, and Development Award, Nguyen Thanh Dung, the Prime Minister of Vietnam. The Prime Minister has been an exemplary leader not only for Vietnam, but for the region. He built close ties to Myanmar's leaders and was instrumental in persuading them to adopt political reform. He has pressed ASEAN member states to increase their economic and cultural ties. He's been a powerful voice for the rule of law and mutual respect as the standards for resolving disputes in the South China Sea. He is one of Asia's strongest proponents of cyber openness and security. In Vietnam, he has led Vietnam's economic recovery effort, putting his country on the path to sustainable and rapid economic growth. He has forged major trade agreements with countries in Asia, Europe, and North and South America. He has spearheaded Vietnam's efforts at political and government reform, prompting World Business Magazine to name him one of Asia's top reform leaders. Prime Minister Dung is a transformational leader who has brought positive change to Vietnam and to Asia. And so the Boston Global Forum is honored to present him with this award, and in doing so, to acknowledge his contribution and that of the Vietnamese people to advancing the cause of peace, security, and development. And the plaque reads to Prime Minister Nguyen Thanh Dung for his exemplary leadership and contribution to peace, security, and development in Vietnam and Asia. Congratulations, Mr. Prime Minister. Thanks. Okay, now we're going to turn to our discussion of this issue, and we're going to start with Jeremy Samid. Jeremy, where are you? Come on up here and lead us in this next part of the program. Thanks, my friend.
Good morning. So again, my name is Jeremy Samidi. I'm a Governor Michael Dukakis Fellow at the Boston Global Forum. So what I'm going to do briefly today is talk a little bit about the cyber threat landscape. Again, provide some statistics that we have seen out in the field. And then kind of go into a little bit about the action plan as a part of being a fellow at the Boston Global Forum, of what I've been tasked to do as part of that. Okay, so I want to just go through a couple of quick slides here and kind of go through the reality of what we're seeing in cybersecurity. We all know that it's a grim picture out there. So what you're seeing here is a breakdown of where the cyber threats and where the cyber attacks are coming from. So what you see here is approximately 70% of cyber attacks are related to cyber crime, which are financially motivated, which means, simply put, is that close to 70% of cyber attacks are targeted at stealing your data for profit. The next slide I want to show here again is this is the distribution of targets. So what you see here in the top 6 at the top here, linked to industry, social networking, online forums, single individuals, dating sites, and other organizations as well as governments. This affects everybody in the room. A couple of people have spoken about it this morning as far as the cyber attack on Japan. So everybody in this room is affected by cybersecurity in some form or another. These are the attack techniques that we're seeing. So the one I want to point out here is the largest chunk in red, the pinkish red there on the left, which is unknown. So approximately 26% of cyber attacks are unknown today, which means we have no idea what they are. We have no idea where they come from or what they do and how they attack. That is a very large number that we are seeing today as far as cyber attacks. Okay. This is a recent article here. Talks about the cyber losses today. They're estimated anywhere between 300 billion and $1 trillion. It's probably between 300 and 500 billion dollars globally in productivity loss as a result of cyber attacks. That's productivity, identity theft, intellectual property theft, trade secrets, etc. Okay, so back one more, please. So in the Q3 of 2015, there were approximately 350,000 new pieces of malware just in the mobile sector. Those are very staggering statistics. Okay. This is a very pedestrian look here at what's known as the dark web or the dark net, also referred to as the deep web. The dark web gets a lot of negative connotation to it, but as you can see here, Sites that we visit, like Amazon and Google, and eBay, and sites that we all are very familiar with, only represents approximately 19% of the internet, the searchable internet today. Approximately 80% of the internet is unindexed, unsearchable, where all of the illicit activities occur down in what's called the dark web. So you have your hackers down there, they're trading malware, they're selling illegal drugs, they're doing all kinds of illicit activities. Governments are down there as well. This is the negative side of what you hear about the dark web. It provides anonymity, and people do a lot of very illicit things. But there are some good things about the dark web, and I know my colleague Bill Ottman will talk about that today as well. It provides a lot of free speech for countries that don't have free speech, that want to talk about things that are going on in their countries. So again, this is a very pedestrian look at what the dark web is. So what I've been charged with doing as part of the Boston Global Forum is building the cyber threat index. So what we have done is we have started to put this together. These are some screenshots of the site that we are still developing. And what we're doing and what we have seen in working with academia and researchers around the world is that there's a disconnect between the technical reality of what's going on and how that we can connect that with policymakers, legislators around the world to develop better policies. So what we're doing is we're attempting to collect all of the cyber attacks around the globe. And that's a very daunting task. So we started sampling that with a number of different sources in collecting that information. So what we're doing is we're collecting all that information. We're going to allow our subscribers to take a look at all of the cyber attacks that have happened, and we're going to put an index together that sort of puts these on a scale from a severity level to show how severe these attacks are, the global impact, the efficacy of them. Go ahead. The vulnerabilities that are out there as well, so that we can provide this type of data in a one-stop shop area to provide reports and other types of data for policymakers and legislators to look at and show them where these attacks are coming from, how they're attacking us, and what we need to do to better formalize our policies and regulations. So this is something that we're building now, and we're going to continue to build. So as this thing rolls out, we'll keep everybody up to date on where we are. And that's it. That's part of my action plan. Thank you.
Anders Core has joined us on a number of our meetings and has done an extensive report on cybersecurity, which is on our website and available to the public generally. He's here with us. I'd like to introduce him, and then following his presentation, have a good discussion of the participants here as we discuss this issue. So Anders, come on up and do your thing.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. I was really happy to work with many of you on this report. It was really a collaborative effort of Boston Global Forum, although nobody takes responsibility for some of the views that I'll put out here but me, unless you speak up. First of all, I'm very, very happy to be back here at Harvard. I did my PhD here. I remember this room fondly as a graduate student with Professor Martin Feldstein having his economics of national security seminars, which we did here. And this is all about economics. Cybersecurity is all about economics. It's all about national security. That presentation, you see that?
Yeah, this one.
Right in the left, bottom left corner. Bottom left, right there? Yeah. Okay. Should be on the bottom left corner.
No, it must be.
Okay. Oops. Let's see. Here we go. Perfect. Okay, slide. I'm going to cover 6 major issues today. Really what I'm doing is I took what I consider the most controversial or most interesting points out of our paper, and I'm going to cover those in the talk. For other stuff in the paper, you can read the paper. As we heard from a previous speaker, cybersecurity realm is an offense-dominant realm. Offense has the advantage in cybersecurity. Also going to cover encryption, issues of encryption, moral hazard in cybersecurity insurance, cryptocurrencies, the interchangeability of white hat skills and black hat skills, or hacking skills and what we would call sort of cyber defense skills for professionals. And then finally, ethical issues that relate to cybersecurity and the need to have a pure and clean, a more of a pure, clean approach to ethics than we have right now in the cybersecurity realm. I would argue that cybersecurity is offense dominant in terms of military technology, or in terms of security technology in general. We heard that from a previous speaker. You have in an internet system or a computer system, you have hundreds, millions, billions of nodes that can be attacked by a black hat hacker. However, so your defensive forces need to be spread over all of those nodes in a network. And between each node, there's 2 edges. There's information going from node A to node B, and there's information going from node B to node A. And you square that, or you cube it if you include information that can go from node A to node A, and you get a remarkable diffusion of your defensive forces across your network, whereas the hacker, or black hat, can attack a single node and get into your network. So it's an offense-dominant situation. Slide. When dealing with the offense-dominant situation, offense is really the best defense. So we need to, rather than focus as we have on sort of a patchwork defensive approach to cybersecurity, we need to completely shift gears. We can keep that going, but really the main impetus, I would argue, of attack, the main avenue of attack on this issue needs to be offensive operations against black hat hackers and illegitimate governments that are attacking our systems. That can include economic sanctions, as Angela Merkel had talked about. That can include heavy, much stronger surveillance, including backdoors to encrypted devices. Now what we see is Google and Apple and all of the other big device makers out there are building encryption into their systems without backdoors as the norm. That means that every time you and I make a lunch date, which nobody cares about, that's encrypted. My phone's encrypted. So when I make a lunch date with Bill Ottman, that's an encrypted piece of information that nobody cares about. But that piece of information multiplied by billions is the haystack in which the criminals, the terrorists, the illegitimate governments are hiding. We need legitimate governments to have backdoors to that information in order to find, fix, and finish the criminals, terrorists, and illegitimate government use of the internet. Right now, the cybersecurity insurance industry is of the order of $3 billion or something like that. It's pretty small. Whereas the losses annually are in the hundreds of billions of dollars. That means that very little of the cybersecurity risk is actually being covered. So individuals, companies are getting hit with these massive costs, especially when you consider the drops in market capitalization of companies after they're hit by a cyber attack, which can reach into the billions of dollars. When you consider that, the cost that our society is paying for cybersecurity is so massive that we're going to see more and more of a demand for government subsidization of cybersecurity insurance. However, as with FEMA's subsidization of disaster insurance, such as hurricanes, as with the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, which subsidizes terrorism insurance, we see a real moral hazard develop where the individuals and companies are incentivized to build their houses in places that are very insecure. We've got major corporations now in the most insecure cities in the world: New York City, DC, Paris, London, right? Our whole financial system is in London and New York, which are completely insecure to terrorist attacks. Yet government is subsidizing that, and government will subsidize cybersecurity insurance, leading to the same kinds of risks being taken. Slide. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which is the biggest of them by far, are on the rise. This graph is the value of Bitcoin over time. And it's hard to see it, but it stretches back to, I forget what year, but quite a while ago. In 2011 or 12, you see a big spike. Each Bitcoin is worth $1,000 or more. And now the value of Bitcoin is around $400. Now, what does Bitcoin use? What makes Bitcoin different than anything else? One, it's totally anonymous, which is great for terrorists and criminals. Two, it's easy to transfer across borders without any government regulation. So it's perfect for criminals and terrorists. And not only is it perfect for criminals and terrorists, but to make a Bitcoin actually requires quite a bit of computing power and computer engineers to mine the Bitcoin, to solve the mathematical problems required to get that Bitcoin. Now let's compare a Bitcoin and all the work that it takes to get one to $400. $400, you just print $400 bills. It's easy. The government does that. And who benefits when the government prints that money? If it's a legitimate government, the citizens of that legitimate government. Who benefits from the cryptocurrency that's made? No one really, because the person who mined that Bitcoin had to pay market rates for computers and computer engineers to get it out of the system. There's no real benefit. It's a loss to society, and it's used heavily by terrorists and criminals. I would argue we should make these cryptocurrencies illegal. Next slide. The approach, the defensive approach to cybersecurity is, let's increase our cybersecurity budget so that we can hire more cybersecurity specialists. Well, the skills that you need to be a good cybersecurity specialist are exactly the same skills you need to be a hacker. So if we increase our hacking skills out there as a defensive measure, we're also increasing the skill set in the system that's required to attack the system. Now, we know from our speakers and the graph previously that cybersecurity is offense dominant. That means that if we train 10 hackers or 10 white hats, and one of them decides to become a hacker, and 9 of them decide to become legitimate cybersecurity specialists, probably the net effect of security in the system is negative, because that one hacker can do more damage than all 9 of those white hats trying to protect the system. Slide. Finally, on the pure and clean ethics part of the conference, ultimately we will not address this issue without both a strong system of more offensive measures against the hackers, whether that be surveillance, taking them out with drones as we did in Syria, using economic sanctions. We need to use strong offensive measures against the hackers, but also the best defense, in addition to the offense, on this issue is encouraging a more ethical approach among our young, among any vulnerable populations to this type of pursuit, hacking, and that's going to be a very deep process of education, which is why we're here in part at Harvard. So thank you very much. It's an honor to speak to you.
Thanks, Anders, very much. Okay, we've got a number of folks who are here as discussants, but you're all discussants, so I hope we can get on to a good, lively discussion of this issue. And I think we've got folks out there who can email questions and comments, Tuan, into us in the course of this, and we'll pick those up as well. And let me just make sure we have all of the folks that we think are here. Bill Ottman, where are you? Bill, great to see you. Michael Solmeyer. Michael, you with us? Thank you for joining us. Professor Hirotaka Takeuchi, with us? No? Steve Walt, welcome. And General Nguyen, who I know is with us. So let's start, Bill, with you. Do you? Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. This is it's really interesting in the context of purity. You know, what does a pure internet mean? Because it very well means very different things to different people. So let's do it. I'm, by the way, Bill Ottman. I'm a fellow of Boston Global Forum, and I'm also the co-founder of Minds.com. So there's the internet. Keep going. All right, so to me, a pure internet is a free and open source infrastructure. And so this is the stack of the internet. So we have the bandwidth, the information, the data, the software, the hardware, the encryption, and the energy source that is actually powering the internet. So we're seeing open source software start to take over as especially dominant in the private sector, but slowly entering public. We have 11 nations who have adopted some sort of open source policy, meaning that they're using software that they don't necessarily have to buy for millions of dollars or be reliant on a third party to support it. India just has adopted an open source policy for a lot of their infrastructure. The US has some policies. For instance, whitehouse.gov is using Drupal, and there's some data sharing going on, but the fact is that we have tools now to be sharing so much more data that is publicly funded, so much more technology that's publicly funded, and we're in the obviously only in the very beginning stages. So 11 nations, we have hundreds of nations. Every nation needs to be participating in free and open source infrastructure. So open source creates software worth billions of dollars. We all know about Linux. Linux is becoming GNU/Linux is becoming the predominant operating system powering servers and people's personal computers all over the world. Open source encryption doesn't mean, just because something is transparent doesn't mean that it is compromising security. It's sort of a misperception. Gov.uk, open source, is an example of soft power, which we were talking about a lot at the last conference. When you are transparent, it makes the world respect you, generally speaking. All right, next slide. So closed source proprietary infrastructure. When you don't have access to the source code, you can't inspect it for backdoors or security vulnerabilities. Like I said, you're relying on third parties for support and development. I know personal instances of the US government taking out multi-million-dollar contracts for security software and actually never really used it, and then they were reliant on that third party for support because they couldn't themselves inspect the code that they bought. It limits innovation. The beauty of open source is that, and free software, is that the whole world is able to develop it in a collaborative way. You don't have rights to technology, and proprietary encryption cannot be proved to be truly secure. Next. So in terms of access to bandwidth, access to the internet itself, this is a great quote from a friend and advisor of mine, Eben Moglen. What free bandwidth means is that we ought to have a right to communicate equally using the electromagnetic spectrum that belongs to all of us. Instead, governments pretend that they own it, or Mr. Murdoch owns it, Mr. Berlusconi, or the Deutsche Telekom owns it. The result is that we pay to be connected to one another's minds. and that means we can only be as connected as we can afford, which means that poor people and people who are disfavored in societies in which they live don't have the ability to speak, and we need to change that. Eben Moglen, he works at the Software Freedom Law Center and was one of the creators of the General Public License, which is the most common free software license used all throughout the world. Free software. What is free software? Free software means software that respects users' freedom and community. Roughly, it means that users have the freedom to run, copy, distribute, study, change, and improve the software. Thus, free software is a matter of liberty, not price. To understand the concept, you should think of free as in free speech, not as in free beer. We sometimes call it Libre software to show that we do not mean it is gratis. This is a little bit of the confusion of language in the free software world, but people mistake free in thinking that it means price, but it's actually a matter of liberty. Free hardware. So these are the different layers: software, hardware, bandwidth. Free hardware, the actual data centers that are powering our global infrastructure. Open hardware, or open source hardware, refers to design specifications of a physical object which are licensed in such a way that said object can be studied, modified, created, and distributed by anyone. Even for the safety of our own government's infrastructure, if we don't have access to inspect it, we're buying those devices from third parties that could have access. So from any country's national security perspective, it matters to have greater access. Encryption. There's a new UN report out that says encryption tech is crucial for human rights, along with the right to anonymity. Obviously, there are two sides to this conversation, because certain amounts of surveillance are necessary for good reason, but also when you compromise encryption, you're compromising the security of everybody, not just the people that you're trying to gain access to. When we were here the other week, we went to MIT and checked out their new report called Keys Under Doormats, mandating insecurity by requiring government access to all data and communications. Bruce Schneier, who we talked with earlier, has been a huge proponent, saying that open source cryptography is essential for good security. The US government actually increases its funding for Tor, giving it $1.8 million. This is somewhat of a paradox, because Tor is a privacy tool that people all over the world use to maintain anonymity online. We have certain parts of the US government who are saying that we need to compromise encryption, but then meanwhile, the US government is also partially funding Tor. So it's just a really interesting conversation. Let's Encrypt is a campaign that's being backed by dozens of corporations and nonprofits that is trying to give everyone HTTPS for free. We have to get HTTPS going on the Boston Global Forum website ASAP. Next. Open source encryption. In the cryptography world, we consider open source necessary for good security. We have for decades. Public security is always more secure than proprietary security. It's true for cryptographic algorithms, security protocols, and security source code. For us, open source isn't just a business model, it's smart engineering practice. Freedom of information. So 95 countries around the world have implemented some form of freedom of information legislation. There's a new FOIA bill going through, well, that may go through, called the Oversight and Implementation Act of 2015. Open data, so Creative Commons and other open licensing options are really important for governments, individuals to be aware of. Most people don't even understand that the content that we're uploading online can be given a variety of licenses. When you upload your content to Facebook or YouTube or wherever, what is that license? Who controls it? What rights are you giving away? Would it not be better to have greater degree of control over the future of your data? Reforming whistleblower laws, transparency increases security. There's freedom of information is really at the root of security worldwide, because when it's just that paradox that needs to be revolved around. You think that the more secret you are, the more secure you are, but really that isn't the way that we participate in public forums. The beauty of being able to have a public forum like this is to talk about the issues, be fully transparent about what you're saying, and that is how we move forward. Next. And then finally, we have what powers the internet. What is actually pure? The data centers are consuming some of the most energy of any industry in the world. And the source of that energy is often very impure. So when we're talking about a free internet, a clean internet, a pure internet, we obviously have to be powering it with renewable energy. Microsoft, Apple, and Google are doing so, but I think we still need to be much better. I do not agree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Evelyn Beatrice Hall. All right, thanks everybody very much. I look forward to talking more.
Okay, we've got a good amount of time here for good discussion around the table, and I hope with some of the folks that are joining us from around the world. Steve Walt, let's start with you. I don't think you have to come up here. Just soon keep the discussion going. How are we going to do this? Is that mic live, and is that Twan, how we're going to use it? So give us your thoughts, and I want to go to Michael Sulmeyer, and then I'll go around the table.
Terrific. I am not a cybersecurity person, and in fact, if you pushed me really hard, I would argue that the problem has been somewhat exaggerated in at least a lot of the popular discourse. Having said that, the problem is not a trivial one, and so I think the effort that's being made here to try and develop a code of conduct is terrific. And I want to say, I want to make my contribution primarily about codes of conduct in general and how they develop, how they spread, what leads them to be adopted and eventually internalized. If you think of this as essentially the development of a set of norms of behavior that states and corporations and NGOs and individuals would increasingly adhere to, there's actually a pretty large literature in the foreign policy and international affairs field on how that process happens in a wide variety of realms. And I'm going to be borrowing from that, in particular from the work of one of my colleagues at the Kennedy School, Catherine Sicking, who has done an enormous amount of work on how norms emerge, develop, and spread. And she talks about three main stages here. The first one is norm emergence, right? People begin to recognize that there's a problem, that it's a problem that needs some kind of regulation, some kind of guidance. It's gradually understood, and at some point, entrepreneurs, individuals start developing ideas for how this problem might be addressed, what a code of conduct might be. In a sense, that's what the Global Forum is trying to do. It's trying to be the norm entrepreneur developing this new set of ideas. This involves a certain amount of consciousness raising, what we're all here doing today. It involves developing and amassing information. We already saw some presented of us earlier. You think about what groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, the entire human rights movement did beginning after World War II. It was essentially creating new norms, developing information, consciousness raising, etc., to try and get people engaged by the process or engaged in an understanding that this problem is needed and to be addressed. That's stage one. I'd argue that's kind of where we're at right now. The second stage, very important, she calls a norm cascade. This is the point at which the norm starts to take off. Other people begin to embrace it. Other groups and organizations buy into this. And the classic example of this in the literature is the Landmines Convention, which begins with a bunch of NGOs and a bunch of entrepreneurs saying that we really ought to regulate and restrict and eventually stop the production of landmines, and gradually it becomes a worldwide movement. This involves networking with other organizations and groups. It requires developing a norm that has some legitimacy, that is seen as persuasive, that has lots of potential winners, relatively few losers. Ideas that are seen as compatible with existing norms. So, for example, a global code of conduct for cybersecurity that was completely contrary to our basic notions of individual freedom would have trouble getting started because it would be in such tension with other things we already embraced. A couple of other things that tend to lead norm cascades to happen. Sometimes a key event, a triggering event that captures a lot of global attention. The bad news here is what we really would need is a really awful cyber event that suddenly woke everybody up. I'm not wishing for that, but that's the kind of thing one should try to take advantage of if it were to occur. And finally, getting prominent supporters behind it, whether it's powerful countries, powerful corporations, prominent individuals. In the landmines case, Princess Diana of Great Britain became a key advocate, and because she was such a visible public figure, that helped things take off as well. So the next stage, of course, again, when this starts to take off. And the third stage, she calls norm internalization. And this is really what the long-term goal is. So when the principle is or the set of principles is so well established, that first of all, violating them is understood to be a crime, even by those who are doing it. Right? Everyone now recognizes the right and wrong here. Second, it's fully embraced and embedded in domestic law. So it's not just a set of principles that is issued by the Boston Global Forum, but those principles begin to be adopted and written into the domestic laws of other countries, possibly written into international conventions. Now, needless to say, we are not there yet. And this requires a lot of grassroots political work at the international, but also at the local level, I suspect. Let me just end with one final comment here, which I think probably all of you know. Norms do not work 100% of the time, even if they are fully developed, fully internalized. People violate traffic laws on a daily basis, but fortunately, most people observe almost all traffic laws almost all the time, which is why we can have a functioning highway system here. So the bottom line here is that a code of conduct cannot be the only tool in the cybersecurity toolkit, but it's going to have to be a critical part of it. And for that reason, I applaud the effort that the forum is making. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you. Before we go to Michael, just, when you get to my advanced age, you've seen a lot, you've experienced a good deal. And these days, people obviously very concerned about this, invasion of privacy, these kinds of things. I happen to go to a small Quaker college called Swarthmore outside of Philadelphia, way back in the 50s. And graduated in 55 and was drafted. And arrived at Fort Dix as a young draftee with about 25 or 30 other characters who all took that fatal step forward at the Fargo building in South Boston. And 3 days after I got there, I had what passed in those days for a personnel interview, in which another draftee, who was a personnel specialist, interviewed you and then decided where you'd go for the next nearly 2 years. My interviewee had a name tag, and it said Harry Kane III. Now, Harry Kane Jr. was the right-wing Republican United States Senator at the time from the state of Washington. And there were an awful lot of people sitting around Fort Dix at that time who had been drafted who were being held indefinitely because they were members of this organization or that organization. And Harry Kane III, who was my personnel interviewer, had a file in his lap with every single political activity I'd engaged in at Swarthmore College. I mean, who was I? I was this Greek kid from Boston who was down at Swarthmore. I'd never been out of New England in those days. You didn't kind of get on a plane, go places. And I didn't know a Shaker from a Quaker when I got down there, but it was an interesting experience. He knew that I'd been the chairman of the Students for Democratic Action, that I'd run a fundraising drive to the American Civil Liberties Union. I mean, all this was in a file, and this was in pre-computer America. It wasn't until several years later that we all discovered how he and others had this information. The FBI had a tap on the Swarthmore switchboard. And since that was the only way you could make a phone call in and out of the place, we didn't have individual phones, obviously didn't have cell phones. I guess the Federal Bureau of Investigation was listening in on every single conversation that took place during the 4 years that I was there. And that's how they had all this information on me. Fortunately, it didn't send me over to the barracks with all these folks who were facing other than honorable discharges. And they were nice enough to send me to Munsan, Korea, where I spent 16 months. It was an interesting 16 months, but This problem, folks, has been with us for a long time. And it's not that it is important. Obviously, it's very important, but it's important at least from the standpoint of those of us who are elderly to remember that we've faced this before and we've obviously got work to do. Now, Michael Solmar.
Well, good morning. Thanks very much for the invitation to join. And I think the combination of Professor Wall's caution that maybe there's a little bit here that's overblown with the powerful historical reminder that it's not just the interweb that leads to these problems, right? I mean, you can have surveillance before the interwebs, you can have surveillance after. It's not just an internet or cyberspace kind of issue. What I think is needed, though, is a little bit more precision, a little bit more nuance when we're actually describing the current state of affairs and the threat. So let me offer two and turn it over to the next speaker. The first is you've heard some comments this morning that cyberspace is offense dominant. And while I would be inclined to say in some situations it is, sometimes the best defense is actually a little better defense. And I wouldn't want to miss that point, because if you're focusing on a purely offensive strategy, you are also completely underplaying what you can do to better defend yourself. The state of defense right now across so many enterprises is so bad that even incremental steps to improve it end up making a lot of difference against your basic nudneck hackers. I'm not saying you'll be able to defend yourself against every single sophisticated bad guy out there, but that's not what you face. You're not facing every single sophisticated bad guy out there. A lot of times, we're facing the junior varsity team. But because our defenses are even worse than redshirt freshmen, the JV team runs the table. That is not a call for an offense-dominant strategy. You can do a lot on defense to make yourself even a little bit better. Right? That is an important principle that I want to stress here and not let that get lost in the nuance. Two-factor authentication. Right? It is not a panacea. It will not stop everyone from doing everything, but it's free. Google offers it for free. Facebook offers it for free. How many of y'all around the table turn this thing on? Not many, I suspect. Why? I'm not sure. But the reality is there are solutions out there that are not costly, that can protect all of us as individuals and as companies and as enterprises, and just up the game a little. We should at least have to make the bad guys work a little harder. And that is the point that I want to make sure everyone leaves here with, is we don't have to break the bank. We don't need to hire the absolute best skilled talent on the planet to come run cyber offense for Harvard or for the faculty club or for the Boston Global Forum. The other element I'd like to focus on substantively is this question about backdoors and encryption. You've heard both sides of a conversation this morning. One side saying you gotta have mandated backdoors into encryption for national security and law enforcement purposes. You heard another side saying, well, okay, if you do that, you weaken the security of the entire ecosystem for everybody. So go in knowing full well that if you mandate backdoors, that's the same door that all the bad guys can use, from the JV team to the very, very varsity senior team. What I would just note is we have yet to hear a real clarification of how you work with crypto that is outside US jurisdiction. So the calls to mandate backdoors say we need a law in the United States that mandates any designer of encryption in the United States creates a backdoor for government. Okay. So as soon as I know that a US company is doing that, why would I use any US company's encryption? Why wouldn't I just go to a foreign company's encryption? They're not subject to the laws of the United States. So we need to have a little bit more of a nuanced conversation about the fact that this isn't just a US problem that US laws and regulations can fix just on our own. We should try. I'm not saying we shouldn't try. It's a very serious problem. I used to work for the Defense Department. I'm one of the most offense, security-minded, hard power guys you're going to find in this area. But I don't think you can just offense and law your way through it. The other element we need to think about is, so you go through the trouble of actually decrypting all this information. You got your haystack. What are you going to do with it? How do you actually integrate all that information into a picture that's sufficiently timely to act? Right? The little bit of information that we've heard come out after the horrific Paris attacks is that the planners were communicating over SMS in the open, not encryption. And it was still not caught. It was still not integrated into the broader threat picture and then operationalized. I'm not trying to tell you encryption isn't important. It's an important debate we should be having, and I'm glad we're having it. What I also want to make sure we recognize is that once we all come in our minds to resolving it, the problem's just beginning. Now you have to figure out actually what to do with it. How do you actually get this information in a sufficiently timely way to the folks who need it? That's a powerful, even just you get a research agenda going around those two issues. And you're at the forefront of the community right now. I would also note, though, that we've got some wonderful students working in this area. Scarlett sitting next to me. Northeastern is just a rock star totally coming on. And terrific young faculty as well, and Ryan and Jackie, who are here too. So that's the largest, most positive takeaway I would have for you, is that from students to faculty and others, the field is really going to be in a really good shape, I think, in the next 10 to 15 years, thanks to the people, some of them around the table today.
Very, very reassuring. Thanks, Michael. Okay, let's have a good roundtable. We've got a fair amount of time here, and who wants to begin? Thoughts, comments? Anders.
I'll just reply on two of the points.
Hold on a second. Do we need a microphone? Pass that up, folks. It's okay. You can sit. You can sit.
I'll just reply on two of the points you made. One is, why not use non-US encryption? Well, if it's illegal to use non-US encryption or non-backdoor encryption in the US, if you have non-US encryption or non-backdoor encryption on your phone, you're going to jail. That's fine. So, is there going to be a perfect enforceability of that? No. But will it decrease use of that type of encryption? Yes. Second point is that major banks in New York City, with whom I've spoken with in terms of their cybersecurity, are covering 1% of their risk surface. It's simply too expensive for them to fully cover with defensive means all of their risks. So an incremental improvement might be to 2%. Well, frankly, that's not enough. We have to go after the offenders. We cannot simply rely on defense. That's it.
Thanks, Anders. Okay, no comments.
Okay.
So just to follow up on the last comment, I find the encryption point perplexing. So the notion that you would somehow, through legal means, ensure that folks were either using U.S. products where they were backdoor or not, it just doesn't seem feasible. And your point, I guess it makes some sense if what you're really worried about is conducting surveillance within the borders of the U.S. on U.S. folks who are aligned with using U.S. cookies. But that's just simply not the case. That's not the challenge. So I found that point just unusual, and just as a reminder, following up on what Michael said and what Bruce said earlier, I think we have a lot more to lose by weakening defenses and putting all our eggs in the offensive basket. We certainly do that.
I'm not saying all of our eggs. I'm saying we need to significantly increase our offensive capability.
Well, and I would also point out that doing that would create enormous risks of destabilization. So if you really want financial institutions to invest heavily in offense.
No, U.S. government offensive capability.
I really, I think it's great that we're having the conversation and thinking about the value of offense in cyberspace, but just as a reminder that certainly we could do better on defense and that investing in offense has enormous risks. And certainly in the US, we have great offensive capabilities beyond cyber that are incredibly effective for deterrence as well. So just a note of caution.
Tell us who you are, by the way.
Sorry, Ryan Ellis. I'm a new faculty member over at Northeastern.
Great. And where were you, Ryan, before you arrived here?
At Harvard here at the Kennedy School.
Okay. Okay, who's next? And tell us who you are.
And just a quick comment.
So in regards to what Andres was saying about Bitcoin as well, another fellow at the Boston Forum here, her name is Roya Mahmoud, and she's an Afghani entrepreneur. And she was part of an organization with Fresh Day Furrow, who I work with at Code to Inspire, which empowers women in Afghanistan to learn to code. And what they were doing with Women's Annex was actually helping them earn Bitcoin online, because they're unable to participate in the global economy in Afghanistan. So Bitcoin and encryption are actually very similar debates. People want to ban Bitcoin, people want to ban encryption. It's not possible. These are open source frameworks that exist. They're not controlled by any central authority. And also, Bitcoin is being used for many other purposes other than just money. It's used for smart contracts. The blockchain is a technology that major banks are starting to use to help with their ledgers. The New York Stock Exchange just invested like $70 million in Coinbase, which is a major Bitcoin exchange.
Okay. Thanks. Who's next? Tell us who you are.
Hi, Jackie Kerr. I'm a fellow at the Belfer Center. It's relevant also, I last year was at Stanford in Silicon Valley as a fellow at the Center for International Security and Cooperation. I wanted to say a word about the issue of education of people in relevant skills. Being at CSAC last year at Stanford, saw numerous people come through to discuss the issues of national security and cybersecurity and the need for more educated individuals who had the abilities to work in this space, and how important that was to develop the relationship with the people who had the skills for the purposes of national security. Anders made the comment that training people in these sorts of skills that are relevant is dangerous, but I'm wondering how, if the goal is to increase either defense or offense capabilities, how we get there if we don't train people in the relevant skills, and how we avoid falling behind those who would wish to do harm, either state or non-state actors, if we intentionally stall in developing the capabilities ourselves. Thanks.
Andrews, want to pass that microphone up?
I just say super quickly that maybe hacking skills are like tow missiles. It's something that you want in the hands of the military only, or maybe hacking skills are something that's something similar to a police, like a semi-automatic weapon. You really only want SWAT teams that are controlled by governments to have those skills. You don't want to diffuse those skills broadly into the community.
Is that possible?
Yeah. Don't fall over, Bill.
How is that possible?
Got me all shaken up.
My name's Mark Harding. I'm CTO at Mines with Bill. I just want to count what you said about, it should be only, the governments who should be able to hack or whatever, but people can learn it themselves. There's all this stuff on the internet, and people can self-teach themselves how to code. And the idea that, people are always bad, people can hack for good, people can tell other sites what vulnerabilities they have so they can resolve those issues as well. So, you can't stop people hacking because they can find out how to do it themselves. It's not something that has to be taught through academic establishments.
Other comments?
My name is Mario. I'm from Mozambique, and I'm a photographer. Well, for me, I feel a little bit out of the context just for because of the reality from where I'm coming from. So Mozambique is a new country, and about 80% of the population, they don't have formal education. So I think that for me, the question that always comes to my mind, for example, is that imagine like people that are struggling every day, like looking for jobs and opportunities, you know. So when you talk about the internet and the new technology for local population, they don't have an idea about what you're talking about. And every day, today, like about 200 or 150 billion of emails that we're sending, 90% is spam. And this affects like to local population in Mozambique because everyone there is being out looking for job, even young people. And that's why like most of young people they and the risk for what has been circulated online by the mafia groups or I don't know. So I think that for me the most important things about how to adopt the strategy to educate the local population there, because even if we're talking about the government, as you say, like I don't know, like to try to involve the local population, it's very complicated, you know. But how that we can adopt a strategy that we can include those people, the majority. I'm not talking about US or the West, but most people in Africa, when you talk about internet, they don't know. The generation of my parents, if you talk about Viber, if you talk about Facebook, they don't have an idea about what you're talking about. Some young people, like my friends, they know what is Facebook, they know what is email, and they have it, but they don't have any interest in sending email just to read. They use internet to look for jobs and opportunities. And when you're talking about US and Europe, they want to come, you know. So if you send an email like, hey, I have this business, I want to bring you here, that's they will give credibility to it. You know. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Any other comments? Yeah. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One is a question. I heard something this morning that has me slightly puzzled, and that was the comment that the corporate world is underinsured against this problem. I'm willing to believe that corporations are occasionally collectively stupid, but it's hard to believe that if the problem is as big as some maintain, that corporations haven't insured themselves to a level that they are reasonably comfortable with. And so does that tell us something about the true nature of how dangerous this is to corporations, that they're not spending an enormous amount of money trying to insure themselves against this problem, because they don't see it as a problem. They understand they're going to pay some price for it, they understand there's going to be some inconveniences and costs, but it's not worth spending a huge amount of money to be able to cover themselves against all that. And please just inform me, because I'm a little bit puzzled by that. And that gets to the second problem that I alluded to at the very beginning of my remarks. How are we going to measure this? What's all to measure the true extent of the problem? What's always troubled me about this is one of those realms where you need a lot of technical knowledge to really understand the issues carefully. And there are an awful lot of people in the business who have an interest in making sure we're all really scared about it. Anybody who sells antivirus software, anybody who is a cybersecurity consultant, anybody who wants to sell a book on the subject, generally wants to get people as alarmed as possible. I'm not saying they're necessarily wrong, but there's an awful lot of people in that business, and there's relatively little money to be made saying to everybody, relax, it's not that bad. So how do we appraise, given that most of us don't have a technical background that allows us to assess these claims? How do we appraise it? I've been wanting for years now to have a genuinely bipartisan, objective task force on this to try and give us a well-informed and honest appraisal of how serious the problem is, one that includes both people from the cybersecurity industry, but also some well-informed people who don't necessarily have money in the game.
Roll that baby over here.
Dick, tell us who you are.
Dick Pirozzolo. I'm on the editorial board of Boston Global Forum, and I run a public relations firm, so I thought I would comment in terms of brand and brand building. We have I know that everybody can't hide under a rock, fearing either a cyber attack or somebody's going to leave a satchel bomb in the cloakroom. But I think there's a cost of rebuilding a brand that may not be included when you think about a company being hacked. And the perfect example is TJX Corporation, which operates 4 retail outlets. They were notified by the FBI that they were being hacked. They didn't even know it. And then even after sufficient experts swept the entire system for bugs, the hackers were able to leave a tiny bit of code on their computers such that it would just go on and off every once in a while, and it would collect a few credit card numbers at a time. And so it took a long time before they even ferreted that out. You know, in terms of understating, overstating the problem, you know, there's probably half the people in this room that have had their credit card hacked. I have. In fact, I just bought $1,300 worth of cloud services from Amazon, and my wife gave somebody a refrigerator who lives in Estonia. And we don't take these very seriously because you call the credit card company and they say, oh, we'll take care of it, and the problem goes away. But imagine if we were on the hook for all those costs. I think we would might have a different view of the severity of the problem because it is so pervasive. So I will pass the mic to anyone else who wishes to comment.
Tell us who you are.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Mia Pham. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow from the Woodrow Wilson School, Princeton University.
It still is the Woodrow Wilson School, so far as we know, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to this very important forums. I do not have a background in IT or cybersecurity, but I think that it's a very complex problem, and it depends a lot on the development of technologies. But from my legal background, I can say that there are 2 main issues that we need to put into consideration when dealing with cybersecurity. The first, that we have to consider the relationship between the public interest and individual human rights, the confidential private life of people and the public interest. The second thing is that I think there's something similarly between the cybersecurity and climate change, because for environmental issue you do not have border. It's same like for the cyber world, you do not have border. So it's because it do not have border, so we need to have the support and the commitment from all over country in the world to deal with the cybersecurity. Thank you.
Way down there.
Hi, I'm Ryan Venus from Northeastern University, colleague of Governor Dukakis. I want to get back to this offense dominant talk. What I do in my research is I look at the past and make predictions for the future. So let's look at the 2 maybe most offensive dominant cyber attacks we've seen. One is Stuxnet, the other is maybe Shamoon on Saudi Arabia. That was supposedly from Iran, but they denied it. So that's one issue. If offense is dominant, then why are states denying these overt attacks? The United States and Israel denied it for a while before it came to bear that it actually was the United States. And then let's look at the impact that these attacks really did have. Did Stuxnet deter the Iranians from developing nuclear weapons? It's hard to say, but I would say no. And what did Shamoon do in the long run for Saudi Arabia's oil industry? It didn't do that much damage. So these policy impacts are what we're talking about. And also, I want to say that we like to focus on data breaches rather than those that are deterred. Kind of like we do with terrorism, that we never talk about when the terrorist attacks have been deterred. We only talk about when it happens, and we like to focus on that. I think that's something we also need to think about when we're looking at cybersecurity as well. How many times are we blocking these offensive type weapons from breaching our networks?
Thanks, Ryan. Let me raise a broader issue, if I can, before we wrap things up. We've got this problem. Steve, it may be serious, it may not be serious, but it's out there. And at least this country is going to be spending billions, according to General Alexander, who was the head of the National Security Agency, on offensive cyber teams. I don't know how much that's going to cost, but as somebody who is also very concerned about our ability to invest in important domestic investments, that's money that's going someplace else. And presumably other governments doing exactly the same thing. What do we do about that? Is there a way to not only talk about an international code of conduct, but a set of rules that could be effectively implemented, which would make it less necessary, or maybe even unnecessary, for us and lots of other governments to spend a ton of money on this thing in a new form of warfare? And what are the prospects for that? And who should we look to do that, to lead that effort? Or is this just one of those things where we're just going to let the music play and essentially accept a new reality, which is that this is something else the taxpayers and governments are going to have to put a lot of money into, which means that those monies and those investments cannot be made in things that I think most of us would think would be significantly more important in improving the quality of life of our fellow citizens. How about that? How about that? And presumably, at least the Secretary General of the UN is interested. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been nice enough to send us a statement. How do we approach that? And who's doing anything about it these days? I mean, I gather there's some small office at the UN that's working on this, and we've had occasional international conferences here and there, but Ryan, that doesn't strike me as being a particularly satisfying answer to what is going to be another arms race in which we spend billions and trillions, offensively, defensively, or otherwise. How about that? And maybe, I mean, is this something that the Boston Global Forum, among other organizations, might at least try to stimulate, not just by having a meeting here and talking about a code of conduct, but by seeking to stimulate serious action across the globe and among governments as well as good people who, like me, are a little concerned about this. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, it's a great call to diplomacy as opposed to a call to arms, and I think that's really nicely said. What I would submit to all of you here is that this is maybe one of the rare times government is on the case. I just left 5 years in Washington seeing how federal government has responded to the call you've just made. The State Department's office, just as an example, that is charged with leading and generating an international negotiation posture around the very issues you just articulated, has grown faster than I think any other State Department office that I'm aware of, and everyone else looks at cyber with envy across the federal government. So government is responding, and that's why.
Can I interrupt for a second? Tell us a little bit about the details of that.
So
what's the office? How rapidly you say it's been growing rapidly? I mean, I don't have a sense at this point in time that my government or any other government is aggressively pursuing the kind of thing that we're talking about, at least that I've suggested, but maybe I'm wrong.
The U.S. government basically just held hostage an entire state visit from Xi Jinping to very aggressive Chinese cyber operations, and with a very clear threat of rough sanctions that were going to come if there wasn't a deal made. So whether or not anyone's acted on it, whether or not it'll be implemented in good faith, who knows? But what I am trying to indicate to you is maybe some form of optimism that the U.S. government gets it. This is a new challenge for a lot of leaders. There's going to be a lot of errors. And unlike most other national security challenges, the role of the private sector here cannot be better called out. So much internet infrastructure is owned by private companies. Even if you could get complete coherence across the federal government on the right idea, it solves about 10% of the problem. Because you also have to get private sector companies, not just Facebook, but telco companies, the whole lot of them, to play ball also. So it's a really thorny challenge, but what I'm trying to indicate to you is, again, by really threatening to hold hostage a state-level visit from Xi Jinping, from an executive order that now for the first time ever authorizes a new kind of sanctions against companies and countries that perpetrate malicious acts against us, indictments against malicious hackers abroad, an investment, as you said, sir, huge military force structure for not just offense, but also defensive operations in cyberspace too. I look at all this, coming up here to Harvard and getting a chance to think a little broader and say, wow, just because we probably need to publicize it a little bit more. We probably need to explain it a little bit better to everyone. But government is not completely asleep at the switch, I think, as much as we might think walking away from here. I won't go into Steve's fantastic questions about insurance round, but these are great questions also that touch on the private sector and talk with you about more.
But let me ask you this, Michael. To what extent are we trying to use our leadership to internationalize this problem? I mean, I understand this relationship with the United States and China is a very, very important bilateral relationship, and we got to be taking it very seriously, and that includes who's doing what to whom when it comes to cyber. But it strikes me that one of the things the United States ought to be doing is really getting it up there. And as I say, trying to internationalize this thing and begin to get serious about developing institutions, rules, a combination of those that might conceivably make it less necessary that we have to spend billions on this stuff. What do you think? And what are we doing about it?
Great point. So it's a good opportunity to talk about the work that our State Department has led at the United Nations with a group that's called the Group of Governmental Experts.
Tell us about that.
That convenes on a regular basis to address a particular topic that is of concern in international cybersecurity. A year or two ago, we actually got all the members of the Group of Governmental Experts, about 20 leading countries, to agree that the laws of war apply in cyberspace. Right? The Russians and the Chinese also agree with this. Now, you can look at that and say, so what? But I'm trying to indicate to you that there is a process being led here through the United Nations that the United States is playing a very important role in to try to get consensus around these core principles. So you can't just, cyber is not the wild, wild west. But the United States is not the only actor here. The Russians and the Chinese have another idea about how international governance should work in this. And their main principle is content control. They would love to see international governance of the internet. They would love to see peace and stability on the internet that allows them to take down content they find objectionable. Right? We have a problem with that. I think a lot of countries have a problem with that. So this is not just a case where the United States can get up on a stage and propound and lead. We have to combat aggressively a counter movement that wishes to take the internet in areas that I don't think are consistent at all with a lot of values that we all share here.
How do we get more visibility behind this effort? I'm just one guy that reads the newspaper and tries to stay informed. And a lot of this is new to me in terms of what we're doing. I mean, isn't it time to kind of get it up there in light so we begin to
It's difficult. I'm a turbo nerd. I built computers in my mom's attic, when I was growing up. So I love this stuff. I mean, I eat it up. But one of the things that I think you'll see a couple things. First, the presidential campaign season gives a lot of debate forum. There's been a lot of talk, oddly enough, about cybersecurity. It's a little chest bumpy, but candidates are mentioning it, so it is becoming a broader part of the domestic political discourse. And so that's one thing. And I think as the field winnows down, you'll have more concrete opportunities to hear them talk about issues beyond just, I will cyber attack anything that walks kind of language, which isn't helpful, but that's what we're hearing right so far. Secondly, the unauthorized disclosures by Snowden had a very chilling effect across a lot of different enterprises and governments that I think there was a trend towards greater transparency and openness in talking about it. That put a momentary, I think, pause on that transparency so that you could assess really what damage had occurred, what was going to occur. But I think we're now starting to come past that a little bit. And I think that the transparency spirit that a lot of countries feel is necessary in this space is slowly being re-energized. But that put a halt to a lot of efforts because you had to triage everything going on. So I see that getting better, but I share your frustration and disappointment on that, and I think we can all do a lot better on it.
And unfortunately, I wasn't a nerd. Of course, we'd had computers back in those days. The reason I went into politics was because I got a charitable D in general physics at Swarthmore College and decided to do something else. I'd never had that experience in my life. I mean, you just worked harder and you did better, right? I just couldn't get it. So I'm in awe of those of you who get it, but just as one citizen concerned about what I'm seeing, another race and another arms race and billions being spent on this stuff. And it strikes me that one of the things the world community has to do, and maybe this forum can help to stimulate this, is to see if we can't get control of this and get ourselves a very visible international process in which people are beginning to discuss these things and discuss ways of maybe making it less necessary for governments to invest huge amounts of money in this stuff, offensively, defensively, or otherwise, as we try to come to some conclusion. Andrews.
I would just point out that making agreements at the UN is all well and good, and a bureaucratic office and State Department which just lost tons of data to the Chinese, right? OPM lost tons of data to the Chinese. So what you're seeing is you see agreements that are being made, but then broken by the Chinese. I do stuff in the South China Sea, Declaration of Conduct, totally broken by the Chinese. Minsk agreements in Ukraine, totally broken by the Russians. With the terrorists, there's no one to even negotiate with. So this kind of approach, to me, sounds naive. If you look at the history of what's going on with these agreements, they're made and then broken. And so we need to think of it, as much as I would love, right, to have a more peaceful approach. The reality is that major adversaries that we're facing are not taking a peaceful approach. They're taking a very militaristic approach, and it's forcing us to react, right? And so that is the situation.
We've got a question from out there in the big wide world from somebody who's a part of this. Well, let me raise two questions. One is, now that smartphones are more popular and continuing to increase, what is the top smartphone risk now? I assume for interference. What's the answer?
Top smartphone risk.
The top smartphone risk now.
We deal a lot with mobile security and mobile risk today. You hear the term there's an app for everything, there's an app for that. So I think one of the biggest risks we face today are apps that are being created in multiple environments and multiple ecosystems. It amazes me how Angry Birds, when you install that, it asks permission to have access to your camera and have access to your microphone and your contact list. So a lot of these applications that are out there, we prefer convenience over security. So in order to benefit from the experience from all of these different apps that are out there, we are openly giving permission for all these vendors to collect all the information on it. So when we're in New York City or we're here in Hartford and something pops up on your screen from one of your applications that says, hey, there's a sale going on here at a particular store. Well, it's tracking where you're going, and you've given permission to do that. So I think those are some of the bigger risks that are being faced today, because a lot of information is being collected, and then being sold and or being stolen, and being used for phishing scams and other types of email campaigns to elicit bad activity.
Okay.
I just wanted to quickly respond to Anders with the Office of Personnel Management leak that you were talking about. Actually, that data got leaked and it wasn't encrypted. So it's actually, and I agree with you in that it is a little bit naive to think that everyone around the world is just going to agree to these, to all these agreements. But that is more reason to secure the infrastructure in the way that is being recommended by people like Bruce Schneier and all of the top security experts in terms of open source, foundation, and encryption everywhere. And then I wanted to respond to what you were saying about transparency and how pre-Snowden leak there was a trend of transparency, and I wasn't really recognizing that. It seems like that caused more efforts for transparency to start beginning. And like recently we saw the EU vote for protection of Snowden to give him asylum. So I think that there's tons more work to do with transparency. And
here's another one. Here's another one that we've got, and I'm not sure I understand it, but let me repeat it. Do you think encrypted messaging apps should allow backdoor to encrypted communication? It's a little confusing here.
Yes.
Allow the government to monitor or stick, I gather, our correspondent is telling us, with truly privacy focus after the Paris attacks. Does that make any sense? What do you think? Or what do you say?
Yes, we should have a backdoor to encrypted messaging apps because terrorists can use that. Not obviously, some terrorists won't. Some terrorists will not have their stuff encrypted. But for those smart terrorists, and those are the ones that we're especially worried about, we should definitely have backdoors. To your point about OPM, government obviously should not have backdoors to their encrypted information. Legitimate governments need fully encrypted, no backdoor information. I'm only saying this about private use that could be used by certain.
Tony.
Thank you, Governor Michael. Now, about your question of how internationally, collectively, we can better address this issue, and I agree with you, with your frustration of many around the table. And I agree with you that Boston Global Forum definitely can contribute to raising the profile of this issue, which you are already doing. And as you introduced, Prime Minister, Japan will be chairing the G7 process, and we will addressing this issue. But the complication of this issue, which is that this is not only the issues of the of Japan, the United States, and 7 countries. This is also not only the issues of what the governments will do or can do. There are lots of other people who are out there. So we need to take a holistic approach. It's not put everything on one basket. No one is talking about it. So we have to take sort of a multi approach. And for that, the one thing I'd like to mention is reaching out to the broader international community. As Michael Governor, you introduced, Japan under Prime Minister leadership has started the process of capacity building, helping other like-minded countries, including Southeast Asian countries, to better deal with this issue collectively. So we like to expand the scope of this network, and what has been done with wonderful U.S. initiative and leadership at the United Nations, that is very important. And he mentioned number 20 of the countries. And there is, besides G7, there is a group of G20. This includes other countries like Brazil, China, India, South Africa, and these are very important players.
So why aren't they?
And this year,
go ahead, Tony. Yeah.
This year, well, in the next cycle, well, Japan will be the chair of G7. G20 chair will be China. So China will have a golden opportunity to play a constructive role as a chair of the G20. So we can talk about it. Some people may be cynical about it, But I think this is worthwhile trying.
And presumably, China would have an opportunity, along with the other 19, to get a serious discussion going. Because at this point, I think, Michael, it's largely a kind of Western European thing. I mean, this group at the UN made up largely of countries from the US and Europe. Are there any other, who are the other countries that are part of this group that's meeting at the UN?
The fact that Russia and China are the key representatives of the non-West, I think, is a really...
They are part of that group as well. So these discussions are already going. Well, that's encouraging, I think. One or two last comments, maybe before we wrap up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, it's quite a broad church when we talk about cybersecurity now and combat, and we've kind of got two different things going on. We've got people talking about like almost state attacks between, you've got China and then the US. Then we've also got, the encryption thing with, people's personal and private lives, that they don't necessarily want that to be exploited, which isn't related to the whole, state battles that's going on with the global government. So I have to almost separate those from each other. And just on the backdoor issue, I just wonder how that's going to be achieved, because the encryption exists already, that people cannot hack it because there are no backdoors. So we're saying we're going to just make that illegal, and if we make that illegal, then are the terrorists not just going to use the illegal stuff anyway, because they're criminals as they are? So it's like people who obey the law are going to use the backdoor encryption. So I just wonder how we're going to get around the backdoor issue that's to be proposed.
I'd like to make just some comments here about what Michael said and Jackie said and Bill said about cybersecurity education and awareness. I think it's extremely important. The human element is one of the weakest links in this entire process. I think that's part of the Boston Global Forum is sharing these ideas and talking about these types of things. I think that educating our youth in cybersecurity on both offensive and defensive is very important, because unlike a lot of what we're seeing today in industry and in government, is the bad guys are organized. They share, they're organized, and we are not as organized as they are. That's the reality. And Michael may understand this in the room, and I'll geek out for just a second, it's perhaps a rhetorical question, but has anybody ever seen what a polymorphic virus actually does? It is truly, to me, one of the 8 wonders of the world, how these things are so intelligent, how they dig deep, they attack systems, and the veracity is just astounding to me. So the threat is real, and it comes from all over. It comes from insiders, it comes from state-sponsored, it comes from hacker groups. And if you've never been up against a hacker group, some of these more famous ones you read about in the press, they're very, very good. They're very organized. And again, the threat is real. I'm not selling what I call FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's more of an education process here of what we're actually up against and truly understanding the adversary, because they're only getting better, and technology needs to keep pace with that, as does policy and as does regulation around the world. And it's a very complex issue. So I think to the core of part of what we're talking about, some of the sentiments that I agree with you guys, that education is key, and educating people in cybersecurity.
Okay, well, this has been, at least for me, a very enlightening morning. And I hope it gives us an opportunity and a platform to really take this up several notches here, because it strikes me that not only is it very important, but it's time to get it up there. And I think we have an opportunity as part of the Boston Global Forum to do that. And a huge thank you to all of you for being a part of that. Now, I have one last agenda item here, which you're going to have to help me with, Twan. Online Festival for a Clean and Pure Internet. Sounds like a party or something. What's the online festival? Come on up here. talk to folks about this.
Yesterday at MIT, we announced already with the support from Mark Garvan Institute for Brain Science Research, and that is 2 p.m. Boston time, but 4 p.m. 4 a.m. December 12 in Tokyo time. That means Global Cybersecurity Day already at that time. And today now we continue Global Cybersecurity Day at 12 p.m. now, and exciting. That is this is the time Boston Global Forum was born. 12 p.m. December 12, and we have for clean and pure internet. That is a festival online to encourage people post picture, videos, stories to support for a clean and pure internet and support for ethical conduct for cyber peace and security. One initiative of Boston Global Forum. Today we introduce Mario Marcillo. He from Mozambique. He's a photographer. He is one of top 100 global thinkers named by Foreign Policy recently, some days ago. So Mario can talk something to support for that.
One last comment, and we'll wrap things up. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Mario, and yeah, I was invited for this event, which I find very interesting for me. And as I said before, so I'm a documentary photographer, and my work is more concerning to human rights and children's rights and the woman. So what I'm trying to do also with my work is that I believe in the power of still image to bring positive change related to the world we are living in. And what I do in Mozambique, as I explained before, more about education and how the majority of local population, they don't have a real formal education. And when we talk about the internet, when we talk about information, they are out of the world we are living in. And with my work, so I try to contribute for better world, and I think that it's very important for me. It's very important for me, like, to do what I do because I believe in it, and the reason it's important is because I try to develop projects that involve the local population so they can know what we're talking about and which world we are living in. And at the same time, with this project that I've been doing, I've been bringing them to different places where other people also can see these realities. And I think that it's very important event about the poor internet because it's more constructive in educational way. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Just a few thank yous before we wrap up. First to Tuan, who, of course, without whom we wouldn't be here, and he and his staff have done just extraordinary work to bring us together and to get the global forum moving. And I hope this is the beginning of even more. To our friends at the UCLA for their contribution, and particularly the UNESCO UCLA Chair on Global Citizenship Education, for incorporating now the Code of Conduct and Global Cybersecurity Day, their educational program. As some of you know, difficult though it is, Kitty and I drag ourselves off to UCLA the day after Christmas, and we don't come back until the 1st of April. It's a terrible burden. Somebody's got to do it. So we'll be out there, but we'll be very much a part of this. And secondly, Bob, to you and the folks at the McGovern Institute for contributing so much to what we've done here, and especially this day. A thank you to you all, and I hope and expect that we're going to take this now and really move it, and with your help and support, see if we can't make this something that the world pays attention to. It's awfully important. Thanks very much.